Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Work Comp Talk. And yes, we're taking it back to COVID days, virtually, that is. We are super excited to be here with you. As you can see, Bilal's in his house. I am in my house. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy ass schedule, Bilal, to join me in this episode. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, this would be the moment for me to invite you to do so. We do hope you subscribe. You can get a ton of information on there and in-depth conversations of the crazy worlds of workers' compensation here in California. Not only am I going to invite you to join us on our Work Comp Talk podcast page for YouTube, but I'm also going to invite you to join us in our official sponsors YouTube page as well. That's Pacific Workers. You can tag them anywhere, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Just type in Pacific Workers and you'll find it. That is, of course, Bilal's company. And there is a ton of more information on those pages as well that you can dive into and get more information regarding the complex case of, the complicated cases of workers' comp and more. There's tips in there. There's everything about settlements. There's just so much information you can dive within those channels, social media channels, and get more knowledge into your brain. So that way, when you're working with your workers' comp case, you know exactly what the hell you're getting yourself into. Well, anyways, without further ado, and putting all those notes aside, today's conversation is going to be very, very interesting because, believe it or not, it happens more often than not, and it's unfortunate. How do you know what you are considered when you're working? Are you considered an employee? Are you considered a contractor? What the hell is your status in your job? And that's what we're going to be discussing below. Misclassifications in workers' comp. No one thinks about it until you get injured and you're in a pickle.
It happens all the time, unfortunately. Just generally speaking, you can be an independent contractor, which means you pay your own taxes, you have deductions, you're usually your own business owner, things like that, and you're contracting with a business to provide them a service that maybe they wouldn't otherwise have in-house or, even at home. If you call a plumber, they're not your employee. They are an independent contractor. They own Bob's Plumbing, whatever the name of their business is, electricians, construction workers, same thing. And so you see a lot of businesses employ people, but they call them contractors because there's really financial benefits to the employer. The employer doesn't have to pay payroll tax. They don't have to provide, health benefits. They don't have to provide retirement accounts. They don't have to do much of anything. And namely, the biggest thing that's relevant to our conversation is they don't have to provide workers' compensation to independent contractors. And before, it used to be a much more difficult, I guess, decision to make whether someone's an independent contractor or not. There was I believe, 11 factors that were used, and the courts would say, "Hey, do you meet these factors? Do you have your own business? Do you participate in the finances of the company? Do you have your own uniform and tools? Do you provide your own training? All that stuff." However, there was a law that was put into effect 2 years ago now, 3 years ago, actually. And that basically reset what it means to be an independent contractor versus employees. That case was Dynamex, and it basically said, look, if you're under the control of your employer and you're doing what that employer does, if you're an independent contractor, but you're a plumber for a plumbing business, you're not, you're not doing something separate and unique. You're really just participating in what the business is. You are an employee. Unfortunately, we still see every day that there's businesses misclassifying employees as independent contractors, really to just try and skirt by and shave off costs to their business. We see it a lot with construction businesses. Construction businesses in particular, contractors of any type, whether electricians or not, have to be licensed in California. And they get their license from the Contractor State Licensing Board. And when they obtain or renew their license, they have to provide workers' comp insurance information. And oftentimes in these cases, we'll see that our clients will get hurt. I'll go look up the contractor's license, and the contractor will certify under penalty of perjury that they are exempt from having workers' compensation insurance because they do not have employees. So it's something that happens all the time, unfortunately.
And it doesn't just happen in construction. And you and I were having a discussion about this earlier today, where we, you know, discussed the case of my mom. My mom went into work at a, massive, well known job site. She was hired through an agency in the beginning and then essentially transitioned directly to work for that company. Her mindset and the mindsets of those that come in through agencies to work for a different type of company is, oh, I'm considered a contractor. I don't necessarily work directly for the company because I got hired through this agency. So we're contractors, but you're really not. So there's a lot of things happening, not only for construction workers, it could be for those who work at Amazon. How did you get hired? You know, the little app that you can become an Amazon affiliate and kind of help out and do this and that, and it's just like you feel like you're on your own boss, but essentially you're doing the duties of warehouse workers and stuff like that. So it's not just construction workers. So
Yeah, and I think what you're referring to, it's there's two different types of employers in California. They're called general and special employers. And when you're talking about what they call PEOs, professional employment agencies, staffing agencies, they are a general employer that can sometimes staff for a special employer. So you may go work for a company, we'll call it Carmen's Employees International, right? And Carmen's Employees International uh, has employees that they then place with companies like, Bilal's Electronics or whatever the company is, right? And so technically the person's doing work for me in my electronic company, but they're really your employees, the staffing agency. And that's another debate we get in all the time because there's a lot of corporations that do staff people as temps or otherwise. And it's a debate who's actually liable for the injury. Is it the staffing company or is it the special employer where the person was placed? And really, that depends on who's paying the bills. In the case where the staffing company is actually paying for the wages, the healthcare, all that junk, they are actually the primary party that's responsible for workers' comp. If they are not, it's the employer where that person is placed. It's the employer's responsibility. However, that creates problems sometimes because sometimes the employer doesn't have work comp insurance, or maybe they're misclassified as an independent contractor and not an employee. And so we fight this battle all the time, unfortunately, and it comes up a lot. And it's even more problematic, like I said, when the employer doesn't actually have insurance, because if they're trying to skate by and not get work comp or, not have employees, chances are they don't have the proper insurance either.
and that's usually the case. I feel like one of the reasons why people bypass the idea of considering an employee an actual employee is for that simple fact. I don't have to pay workers' comp insurance. And that's usually the number one reason I can think of companies constantly saying, "Well, I don't have employees. No, I just hired this guy, but he's his own company." And it's just like, no, dude, not really.
Yep.
And you're right. The whole agency and staffing agencies versus who's liable, whether it's the agency or whether it's the company that's working for it, they tend to also kind of put fingers on each other and play games until the injured worker just says, "Well, screw you guys. I'm gonna go figure this out on my own." It happens
Yeah.
often. I see it often. I hear
Well,
it.
you see a lot of pressure from the employer saying, "Hey, you have insurance. Go see your own doctor. I'll pay you a couple weeks of wages. You don't want to report this as a work injury. It'll get me into trouble. It'll hurt my business. That'll affect you. You wouldn't want to hurt me or employer,
Oh,
would you?
yeah.
We're
You've done
friends."
this before? Have you done this before? Where's
Yeah,
Bill's electronics at?
yeah, it comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Seriously, that we'll see it all the time. We'll get a client. They'll come in. They were, a laborer at a construction site. They suffered, a fall injury or something. Their employer takes them to the hospital, tells them, "Hey, say you fell at home. Say it didn't happen at work. I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it." And then they say it happens at home. The doctor will treat them or whatever, but it's not enough. They're off of work still, or they get fired or whatever. And then the employer stops talking to them. Turns
Mm,
out they don't have work comp insurance, and
you're
it's unfortunate and it happens all too often. Luckily, we go to bat for these people, and I think more often than not, we kick butt and we get them the benefits and medical they deserve finally, whether it's from the employer themselves or we go after what's called UEF, which is the short for the Uninsured Employers Benefits Trust Fund, which is basically the state's version of insurance to protect injured workers in the event they are working for a shady employer that does not have workers' compensation insurance. So usually that's kind of like a slush fund that's there to pick up for the injured worker.
and it doesn't mean it's a big fun, by the way. Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's paid for in a lot of ways. Taxpayer money goes there. Thank God. It's fortunately, it's been there for a lot of my clients to help them out. Um, but the fund will actually try and recover from the employer. So I've had cases where even while the case is pending, the state will actually go and file a lien on the company owner's house. And they'll chase down the money because they don't just pay and say, okay, well, you're a shady employer. It's fine. We'll cover you. Yeah, the state wants their money back. So
That's true. That's good. So, what is one of the ways, Bilal, that an employer, an employee like me working for a company, how can I determine what am I considered? Is there something tangible that was given to me that'll tell me, no, this is considered you being an employee? You mentioned depends who's paying you and stuff like that. So, can we elaborate a little bit more on that?
sure, I think at base, you're an employee of someone if you are receiving a W-2 and you're receiving a pay stub. So if you are an employee or you're being treated like an employee, you should receive paychecks, and your paychecks are actually mandatory by law, required to have a pay stub attached to it with certain things listed. And you can look it up. It's Labor Code 226. Basically, that sets out what needs to be included. And it's namely the hours worked, the rates, whether there's overtime. You'll see typically deductions for taxes if you're an employee, because your employer is responsible for taking those out. It's things like state income tax, federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, and state disability. And so you'll see those things on all your pay stubs. Now, if you're an independent contractor, you may just be receiving a flat payment. You
Hmm.
won't actually have things deducted out of it. And that's because employers aren't responsible for paying taxes for independent contractors. And usually, people who are independent contractors are getting paid usually cash under the table, or they'll just get a flat rate check. More often than not, I see misclassification issues where someone is paid a flat rate per day or per week without regard to the number of hours they work. It's like, hey, here's $100 a week or a day or whatever it is. So I think that's the number one way you can tell whether or not you're an employee.
Good to know. Good to know. Is there, you mentioned also there's ways you guys go bat for these type of situations. How would you be able to fix such situation if you're thinking you're an employee and your boss is misclassifying you? What are some of those scenarios that have, I guess, foreplayed being an attorney?
So, I mean, usually we find these things out when the client has come to us because the client's done some research or has some base understanding that if you get hurt at work, there's supposed to be work comp coverage for you.
Mm.
Maybe they, did a little Google research or something, or their friend told them, hey, that's not right. But more often than not, a lot of people kind of fly under the radar and they never really find out.
Mm.
And look, it works until it doesn't. And I don't want to advocate for, people doing things that are illegal, dodging taxes and such. But a lot of people who are in these relationships with employers where they're being misclassified are actually also benefiting it from, because a lot of people who are receiving cash wages aren't reporting all their income and paying taxes and things like that. And so, a lot of employees that are misclassified are benefiting just like the employer is. And it's this deal that they informally work out that seemingly works for everyone until someone gets hurt.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for the people who are misclassified and, want to fix it per se, there's wage and hour violations that you can actually sue in civil court for, even if you're not injured at work. Like I said, automatically there's pay stub violations. If you're not receiving proper pay stubs, you can sue for that. If you're owed overtime, meal period, rest period breaks, which by law you're required to have as an employee, but not as an independent contractor. So there's all these causes of action outside of workers' comp that you can actually bring in a civil lawsuit if you are being misclassified. And oftentimes, my firm in particular will file those cases alongside the workers' comp case. We'll get clients who come in, they've got an injury, and it turns out they weren't given lunch breaks for 6 years straight. They were working 7 days a week and they were paid the same hourly wage, the same daily wage, regardless of the number of hours they worked. And so usually the workers' comp case is kind of just like the tip of the iceberg, where
Right. It's like
You're
they're
like, holy crap, this is a lot bigger than we thought it was. And so sometimes I've had cases where the underlying wage and hour case is actually more of a bigger deal than the injury itself,
yeah.
financially for the injured worker and for other people who are working there that are being misclassified as well.
It's insane. I mean, I'm not gonna shade on it, but we did just see something similar like this with the Half Moon Bay shooting. It was unfortunate that situation like this happened, but they uncovered the living situation of all of the employees and the way they were being treated, and it was like opening up a can of worms.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it happens everywhere,
Yep.
all the time.
And that's why I was saying, it works until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, it's catastrophic. And I think a lot of people just don't know their rights. Not everyone can spout off, labor code sections and can tell you, what an employee is versus an independent contractor. I think I take my knowledge for granted just because, I've been doing it so long that these things just come second nature to me to see
Yeah.
something and know it's right or wrong. But a lot of people, they don't. And there's a lot of immigrant workers in particular. You mentioned, the Half Moon Bay shooting. There's a lot of people who work, day labor or work in farming and stuff, migrant workers, and they really get taken advantage of and they really don't know the difference.
No, they don't, unfortunately. And yeah, you're right. Luckily, there's YouTube, right? I think a lot of
Yeah.
people dive into YouTube, and that's how we found a lot of listeners to this podcast as well, because you can learn so much, and social media has put so much content out there for everyone, and there's different platforms, whether that's YouTube, whether that's TikTok, whatever someone's favorite platform is. I bet you anything, if you type something up that's related to a DIY at home, or
Mhm.
trying to figure out how to make a cake, from recipes to workers comp, you will find information out there. Luckily, again, there is so many means of ways people can actually figure out this information if they knew about it. I think
Yeah.
that's the hard part, is not even knowing that you were entitled to this. And
Yeah. And I think there's the component to it too that people are afraid. I see this a lot. We have undocumented workers as clients. And they have this fear that, oh, if I report the abuses my employer is doing, whether it's lack of workers comp, misclassification, underpaying me, that I'm going to get in trouble. I may get deported. I may, whatever the case may be, there's going to be legal ramifications for me, and that's not true. I
no,
know you're entitled to workers comp regardless of where you're from and when you came here. That's 100% true. Same thing for wage and hour violations. Just because you're not legally entitled to work here doesn't mean that you're actually not afforded the same protections everyone else is. And I think the law is clearly designed in a way to protect everyone, and the abuses of employers are unacceptable. And it's on the employer to determine whether or not you should be working there legally and doing the proper paperwork. And if they don't, and they're just cutting corners and choose to abuse you as a person, again, they're going to pay for it. So, I think a lot of people have the concerns about, immigration status or otherwise. And if it's not immigration, it's something else, and I would encourage anyone who's having issues with their employer to, at least got a consultation with a lawyer and talk to someone about it and, figure out what your rights are. And you can weigh the pros and cons and, the cost benefit analysis for moving forward if you do feel like there's something there that you want to fight for.
right. Are there any deadlines for someone that's watching this podcast or listening to the podcast and is realizing, hey, I've got injured before and I had to deal with it, and I was getting paid exactly how Bilal said? That meant I'm an employee and I was misclassified. What can I do? Can I do something after the fact? What are my options there? How
So
much time
it
do I have?
depends. Best lawyer answer ever. Well, just generally for injuries, it's 1 year. But there are cases and statutes that provide for an extension of that 1 year, depending on the circumstances. So, like,
Okay.
if you said, hey, boss, I got hurt at work, your employer said, oh, you don't need to file workers' comp, or we don't have that, go treat on your own. There would be a tolling of the statute of limitations, which means because the employer didn't meet their statutory obligation to inform you of your right to workers' comp, the statute of limitations wouldn't start until you actually found out what your rights were. So if you talk to a lawyer 2 years later and found out you got screwed, we could still probably file the case.
Good to
Um,
know.
if, of course, you did things right and you waited a year, then maybe not. But again, there's extensions for receiving benefits and things like that. But generally, it's 1 year. For mixed classification issues, which are considered, wage and hour violations, those depend on the allegation. So usually for overtime, you can go back 3 years. Pay stub violations is a year. It really just depends. There's other causes of action, class actions, private attorney general act cases, and such that are different as well. But generally, you do have a couple years for those things. Sooner than later, it's always better to talk to someone and figure out what you're entitled to. If you wait too long, it's often harder to get discovery done and pursue the case either way.
Right. And I'm glad you're opening up this information for us because, like you said, if you're already in that pickle of being misclassified, just imagine what other things are taking advantage of, and putting you in these situations that you shouldn't necessarily have to be. And I think one of the biggest benefits anyone can get who's listening to the podcast, who's, subscribed to our YouTube channel, who's learning a little bit more about their rights. The best thing you can do is when you have questions, go talk to the experts, go talk to the people that know the law, go talk to those that live off of this because that's what they do. It's what they've studied, and it's free. Consultations are free. Now, if someone's charging you for a consultation, run as fast as you can because that's not the case in Pacific Workforce.
Yeah, and I'll also say this, as attorneys, we have an attorney-client privilege, and that privilege is one of the strongest privileges afforded to people in the United States. The idea being that you could say you murdered someone and we're not allowed to, we can't tell on you. And so, that being said, if you have concerns about any potential, unlawful conduct on your part, immigration, drugs, whatever the case may be, that is a privilege that you have to consult with us in private that would not be disclosed in any way, shape, or form. So, just for those who are wondering, hey, if I talk to a lawyer, is that going to put anything back on me? Mm-hmm. And the answer is no.
That's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. I think we've discovered a lot. And of course, we've realized through this conversation that misclassification happens, and it usually happens to the person that expects it the least. You may be thinking you are a contractor. You may be thinking, hey, I am my own boss. But you come to figure out that no, you're not. You're misclassified and you're missing out on so many other benefits, which is the sad part. And I think the best way to go about it is if you have any questions, consult with an expert and make sure you get that information from someone who knows what they're doing beforehand so that you won't wait too long and then miss out on all these opportunities. And don't be afraid. Most importantly, don't be afraid. You're not going to be, like Bilal said, taken into like custody or, hey, we're going to tell on you. No, it's you're just having a free confidential consultation and getting some answers to those questions. Is there anything else we need to share about misclassifications? I feel like we could be here for days with this subject. Did we cover the basics?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot. It's really, you got to ask yourself, am I really just working in this person's business? And am I doing what this business does as a whole? It's an integral part. Am I a plumber in a plumbing business? Am I an electrician business? Am I a laborer building houses in a construction business? If you are in that situation, there is a very, very, very good chance you're actually an employee, not an independent contractor. In which case, you really have to ask yourself, am I missing out on things like substantial amounts of overtime?
Yeah.
Am I missing out on lunch breaks that I'm supposed to be paid for? Are the other things that are happening? And is it not just me? Is it 50 other people? It could be a big deal, not just for you, but the people around you that are being mistreated by employers. And really, at the end of the day, it's up to you whether you want to do anything about it, but at least, understand what your rights are. And if you are hurt at work and you're being told you're an independent contractor, definitely consult with a lawyer because, again, there's a good chance you're probably an employee, you're probably entitled to workers' comp. And even if your employer's really shady and doesn't have comp insurance, there's still a remedy for you out there, and we can get that for you. So.
Now, let's say that I listen to Bilal, but I kind of want to do this on my own and I don't want to hire an attorney. What are the odds of me being successful with handling my own case when I am misclassified? How complex is it?
I would say it's very complex, because a lot of it, there's document discovery, subpoenas that we use. Oftentimes, I'll take depositions of employee and employer witnesses. And more often than not, these cases go to trial, which, unless you've done a trial before, you can't just kind of wing it. You have to submit exhibits. You have to call witnesses, subpoena witnesses. You have to be able to write trial briefs. If you lose, have to be able to write a successful appeal on your own. There's a lot that goes into it. And really understanding the law at base to say, hey, are my facts consistent with the law in a way that I'm confident I will win?
Yeah.
And so there are some work comp cases where, sure, if someone's savvy enough and it's straightforward enough, maybe they can do it, But, with this kind of thing, especially involving, the UEF for the state's uninsured employers, that can really get complicated. And I think you really have to understand what you're doing to be successful.
Say no more. Go get yourself a lawyer and save yourself a headache. That's simple. Well, I appreciate the conversation, Bilal. We'll catch you guys on the next episode. Once again, if you've not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure you do so. That way you get notifications or you get a text message saying, hey, Work Comp Talk just uploaded a video. And not only Work Comp Talk, Pacific Workers as well. We constantly update and upload all these informations and videos, shorter versions of it. You don't have to sit here for 20 minutes and listen to it. It's like 2-minute videos. You get all these tips and just so much useful information. If you're not injured or if you've been recovered from an injury, make sure you share this as well with someone who you might think would need this type of information. We wish you guys luck and we'll catch you guys on the next Work Comp Talk episode. Thank you, Bilal.
Thanks.